Hey y'all, today we're going to be talking about the travel from LA through Napa Valley. So we just took a road trip recently and we want to hit you up with some of our pro tips, favorite spots, where we stopped, and so forth. So starting off in the video, we'll talk about driving from LA to Death Valley and where to stay in Death Valley, as well as what to do and what some of our favorite things to do were when we were in the park. Then we'll talk about driving from Death Valley all the way up to Napa Valley. That is a very, very long drive. California is a big state. And then we'll talk about Napa Valley, some pro tips for going, and our wine tasting impressions. Lastly, we'll talk about seeing some coastal redwoods. Those things are tall. So let's dive in. Drove inland to Death Valley, which is pretty close to the California-Nevada border, right?
Yep, we saw road signs to Nevada. I think if we drove another hour, we would have been there.
So logistically, when we were looking at staying in Death Valley, big note, there is one of the towns where you can stay. There aren't a whole lot of towns in and around Death Valley, but one of the towns where you can stay is Ridgecrest, California. Another big one if you go onto the eastern side of Death Valley, is that town in Nevada, which is called Pahrump, Nevada. So that's another good spot to stay. And those are pretty much, if you're looking on Airbnb, the only places that you can find Airbnbs that aren't exorbitantly expensive. So we chose to stay on the west side of the park in Ridgecrest, and it was about an hour to drive into the park in the day, right?
Yeah, it's an hour past a couple mineral mining towns, but overall it's desert, ghost towns. We saw some wild donkeys on the way.
We did.
It's a pretty beautiful and desolate drive.
We did. So once we were actually in Death Valley Park, we were primarily staying off the hiking trails this time, which is a little unusual for us, but we got to take the Jeep and do some four-wheel drives, which was really fun, and hit a few via points along the way. Chris, are you able to recap what we did today? Or that day?
Yeah, we went through, did most of the south part of the park. First we hit a point called Dante's Overlook, which is up in the mountains. I think you're about 4,000 feet up, and you're looking down into Death Valley and Badwater Basin, which is the lowest point in North America. Then we backtracked and, on the way to Dante's Point, we hit this off-road.
It was like Skeleton Point, I feel like that was the name of it.
No. I'm talking about the off-road trail that we did. It was called 20 Mule Team Canyon Road.
Yes.
Name. But that was a really cool part of the park where you drive through these kind of white, yellow, badland hills that are barren. Really interesting kind of sandy rocks. And there's some really fun ups and downs and narrow parts of the road that you drive through. So that was great. Dante's Point next, which was great view. And then we backtracked and went to Zabriskie Point, which is kind of a famous point where you can look down over the basin, and you also see some really cool layered rocks and hills and points in the landscape with lots of different colors. It kind of looks like a watercolor painting.
Yeah, it was pretty. What was your favorite spot that we hit in Death Valley?
I really liked going to the Devil's Golf Course, which is down in the basin. That is where you can drive into the salt deposits that are left by Lake Manly, the prehistoric lake that used to be in the basin, which since dried up. And there you have salt mounds that are about a foot or two, and they're just all over, so you can barely walk without stepping over these mounds. and it just seems like it goes on forever to the mountains on both sides of the valley. It was really otherworldly.
My favorite was the 4-wheel drive road we did, where we were looking in at this canyon, and it didn't look like there was going to be any way to pass it. And then you continued to drive, and there was like a pretty narrow opening through the canyon that you could drive your car through and get to the other side, which was pretty neat and kind of weird. We're several hours inland in Death Valley, and we are ready to start making our way north. So first place that we hit was just kind of a few stopping towns where we just stopped over, spent a day or several days. We chose to go inland so we could go a little bit faster up north. We went from Death Valley to Fresno, from Fresno to Santa Cruz, which is coastal. And then from Santa Cruz, we stayed in Saratoga, California with some friends for a few days. And then we made a big point to stop in Napa Valley. Napa Valley. So it was our first time, both of our first times in Napa Valley. The valley we learned a lot about. Like, it's known for its Cabernet Sauvignon and also for its Chardonnay. So those are two really good wines that you can get when you go there. Another major tip is most places that you go and you do the wine tastings with, you need a reservation. So make sure that you're scheduling your appointments in advance. And if there's any specific kind of wine that you want to definitely try, like for instance, I wanted to do a bubbly wine, make sure that you try and book that 2 or more weeks in advance. Just like they say on their websites, things do book up. We didn't end up getting to do any bubbles because of that. I waited too long. I procrastinated on planning my day. So there was that. Chris, first thing that we did, Del Dotto. It was a cellar tour. What was your impression if you had to describe it in one adjective?
Medieval. I felt like I was under a castle going through this dark cave with huge collections of wine barrels.
Yep, and each of our wine tastings, we did 3 over the course of Friday and Saturday, were unique. On Friday, we got to taste from the barrel. We got to go down into the cellars. It was dark. It kind of felt a little damp. It definitely was medieval, and the wine was really interesting. We, again, got to try straight from the barrel, which was something that was bucket list for me. I wanted to see where the wine was stored. I think the most interesting point for me is that we got to try wine out of a French oak barrel and an American oak barrel, so that those are 2 different kinds of oak wood, and they tasted completely different when you had them side by side, so that was interesting. Okay, that was all we had time for on Friday. We went out to eat at a wonderful restaurant. Highly recommend hitting up anything on 1st and 2nd Cross Street, Maine in downtown Napa. Very, very pretty. We didn't get to spend much time in Unionville and some of the other towns, but they looked very pretty as well and have a lot of really good dining. So highly recommend, if you have a few days to spend there, to try and distribute them across the different cities and towns there in the Napa Valley, because you can hit more wineries and do things that are a little further apart from each other without having to stretch too much. So Saturday, let's talk Saturday. We went to William Hill. One adjective you would use to describe that, Chris, what would it be?
Scenic.
Okay. Can you describe what the experience was like there?
Yeah, we biked in on this kind of out there agricultural road. It was really pleasant bike in. Then we get to the road where William Hill is on. You bike up this big winding vineyard hill.
Really long hill.
Yeah, and you get to this patio where they have seats overlooking the entire William Hill orchard, where you can see grapevines as far as the eye can go. And it's just a really pretty place to sit, very peaceful. You get a lot of sun there, and it was just very impressive.
Yeah, so for our wine tasting there, we got to try 3 reds and 2 whites. They gave us one of the whites as a welcome splash, and then we sampled 1 white, 3 reds, and the notable thing about this wine tasting was it came with some nibbles that were supposed to be paired. So there was a little bit of cheese, some nuts, some dried fruit, things like that. Just very, not lunch or a meal per se, but still something that you can use to accentuate some of the flavors in the wine. Last place, let's talk about the final place we went, James Cole. What was your thought about that place, Chris? What'd you think?
I really enjoyed hanging out in their garden.
Munch, munch, munch. Okay.
My favorite thing there was the bocce.
They had outdoor bocce, which was a big selling point for us. We were really into that after a couple different tastings that day. And it was really cool. The vines were grown right there, and they had their tasting room. And the owners of the winery and vineyard lived right on the property. You could literally point and see their house. It was a very, very small place and lots of bold flavors. It was pretty delicious as well. It definitely was a bit of a hike. We biked everywhere, and so it was a bit of a hike to get up to that winery. Red punch buggy, no punch backs. Let's go. Bit of a hike to get up there biking. However, really worth it and really delicious wine. As well as, I think that was probably the most scenic part of the biking that we did. What would you say?
No.
And that was the Wine to Vine Trail? Vine to Wine?
No, we were on the Silverado Trail.
So we biked up the Silverado Trail to get to James Cole, and that part of the trail was the most scenic. There were vineyards, and you could see the vines everywhere, and that was really wonderful. Now, another interesting thing is that a lot of the wineries and tastings close around 4, 5, or 6 o'clock at night, and so that really leaves the whole evening up to whatever you want to do. And so on Saturday night, we were looking for something to do, and we found that there was going to be a band at Jam Cellars, really, really small venue. We decided to go check it out. And how would you describe the vibe, Chris, at Jam Cellars Saturday night?
The night we went, it was kind of relaxing beach folk music.
That was the live band that played.
Yeah. So it was nice. We got to sit back. We could easily hear each other talk. So it was more like going to a coffee shop with live music than going to a concert, I would say.
True.
Which was nice. We were ready to relax, I think.
Now, the server did tell some folks next to us that if you came most Fridays and Saturday nights, the music was more lively, using his terminology there. And so just something to keep in mind. If you're looking for something chill, just make sure that you try and check on who's going to be playing ahead of time. But it was exactly what we needed after a really busy day of wineries, biking, tasting wine, drinking wine, eating, all the things Napa Valley-esque. So it was exactly what the doctor ordered, I'd say. On Sunday, we had decided that it was time to head out from Napa Valley and see something else that NorCal is very much world famous for. And what is that, Chris? Because that was one of your favorite things about coming to California, sir. Coastal
giant redwoods.
Yes, sir. He wanted to see some big trees. So what did we do? We went and saw some big trees. We went to a park. It was about an hour west of Napa Valley, named
Armstrong Redwoods.
Armstrong Redwoods, I believe State Park, but Armstrong Redwoods, and they had some really, really tall trees. The tallest one they had when we went to visit was 310 feet tall. Wow, that's crazy. What did you think about that experience, Chris? How was it?
It was really cool to be up close to the trees, especially when you're right under them. You couldn't even look up and see the tops. You couldn't even grasp how far it went because it just went way beyond what was visible past its branches. So it was pretty neat. We were there in the middle of the day at noon, and it was really dark walking around because they're so tall they block so much sun.
Cooler. Yeah, 15 to 20 degrees cooler than it was outside. just from the shadiness of the grove that we were in. It was wonderful. Parking was easy. Notably, you can park in the parking lot. It is a $10 fee, $9 for seniors the day that we went. And you can park outside of the park as you're coming in the left-hand side of the road, as you're leaving the right-hand side of the road. And since that is technically outside of state park boundaries, you do not have to pay any sort of entrance fee. You can also drive through the park. They were doing some construction when we were there, so we didn't drive through it. Some of the roads to see the big trees and some of the roads to see the big trees were closed, so we did not do that, but instead elected to walk around. There's a nice loop about a mile and a half that goes to see 3 notable trees. The first of which was Colonel Armstrong. I believe that is the oldest, but not quite the tallest. We also saw Parson Andrews, which is the tallest. It edged out Colonel Armstrong by like 2 feet. It was like 310 feet tall and 308 feet tall.
Despite being 100 years younger.
Despite the 308 footer being 100 years older, right?
The taller one was younger. Yeah.
The taller one was younger by 100 years. The youngins. And then we also saw an icicle tree, which was really interesting and kind of had a weird formation, and it actually really did look like an icicle. The pictures don't do it justice, but it is worth a short visit if you haven't seen any California redwoods before. They aren't quite as big as the ones that are on the coast, as a lot of the signage in the park says, but if you're in Napa, it's a super convenient and easy hour drive out there to see.
Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for some more content. Special thanks to Chris for, number 1, doing the video with me and providing some awesome opinions, and then number 2, actually doing the trip and being patient with me. Thanks guys, I'll see you on the next one.